Welcome to the Multiply Your Success podcast, where each week we help growth-minded entrepreneurs and franchise leaders take the next step in their expansion journey. I'm your host, Tom Dufour, CEO of Big Sky Franchise Team. I don't know about you, but over the last several years, I've heard this phrase and content about growth hacks. And for me, I've always wondered, is this real? Is there any substance behind this? Is this just some kind of new marketing message that goes on? And I brought on our guest today, Nader Sabri, who is an expert on growth hacking and really what he calls growth science. Now, Nader's been described by his peers as the guy you don't want your competition to hire for his innovative growth strategies that have propelled businesses to unprecedented success. Nader's helped hundreds of CEOs, business leaders, founders unlock growth opportunities with growing hacking secrets used by only 1% of companies. Several Fortune 500s use his methods and strategies, including Microsoft, Google, and NASA. It's a really interesting interview. I think you're going to enjoy it. So let's go ahead and jump right into it.
So my name is Nader Sabri. I'm the best-selling author of Ready, Set, Growth Hack, and I specialize in an area which is known as the growth sciences. So we'll dig a little bit into that and help your audience understand a little bit more how they can use some of these sciences to exponentially grow their businesses as well.
Fantastic intro and lead in. And I understand you really helped coin this topic of growth science and really instrumental in creating it. So let's start with just some basic fundamental things. What is growth science?
Sure. So growth science originates from a concept that is more better known as growth hacking. And that was coined in roughly 2010 or so by Sean Ellis. And as it was coined, it was just hacking. It was little small strategies that were able to move you forward exponentially. Well, what happened with time is that those weren't working as effectively just because they were bit more short-sighted. I don't know if that's the fairest way to put it, but what happened is the whole industry started to evolve and it then started to shift towards a science. And as it shifted towards a science, it became more rigorous and tested and objectively measured form of a practice rather than it just being individual kind of tips and tricks on how to grow an organization. And so I helped spearhead that by writing a book called Ready, Set, Growth Hack that Fortune 500s and startup companies and unicorns use as basically a blueprint to help them understand how does exponential growth work and how do they actually go about it systematically.
From a high level, can you talk through just some basic principles about how this works and what that looks like?
So the starting point for me actually is a very personal story. And as I put this book together and train people around the world, I started like most entrepreneurs, of course, not knowing nothing. I don't know how to start a business. So I did what everyone else would do. I started reading books and taking courses and listening, to different audio media. Of course, podcasts weren't exactly at the time when I first started out, but the equivalent of. What was interesting is that, and it still exists till today, is everyone has a formula which they'll tell you this is the way to do something. And if you follow this formula, you'll get the following success and model behind this and you're ready to go. And so you take this off the shelf and you start to do it. And then you obviously don't get the results that you've been promised or been told or the things in the way that they look like and the way that they're communicated. And so what happens is you just kind of keep moving forward. I'll go read this and read that. And it's an amazing exercise. But at the end, what happens is you get very minimal sort of results. And it took me a while to figure this out. But eventually I figured out, well, maybe their formula works really well for them or their specific circumstances, but may not necessarily work for me. And that's when I realized that I had to start developing my own formula. And that's one of the first things I teach in my first book, which is Ready, Set, Growth Hack, which is my goal is to help you find your growth formula. So this isn't about how your competitors in your industry are doing it. That's usually the very first points that comes in the very first conversation with a client where we're benchmarking our competitors and we see on this metric we're not doing very well. So we want to hack that KPI. And I said, okay, hang on. That's exactly part of the problem why you're not getting results. Let's step back a bit and kind of understand the growth sciences and how that works. So the essence of it is when I started to define this in the very early stages, it was a bit controversial because when people would type in, let's say, just growth hacking, and you can do that now, you're going to get this wide range of very technical definitions, and they're not really strategic or in the sense of where it actually goes to. And so I changed that by changing the definition to, basically putting in less effort to achieve much wider strategic results. So disproportionate results is basically what I'm looking for as a very simplistic definition. The reason being is that the growth sciences encompasses a whole range of different things. So as growth hacking was kind of building up, and then there are reasons behind this, which I talk about in my training, which is growth marketing. And it's a very marketing oriented function. But the reality is that the growth sciences, and if you want to grow an organization exponentially, you cannot just look at marketing or sales. So it's equivalent to like, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to work on my biceps every single day. And I do it for 90 days. And at the end of 90 days, I got amazing biceps, but the remaining of my body suffers because one part is overdeveloped and the remaining is not being able to handle those overdeveloped muscles. So an organization is exactly the same way. In order to grow that organization, you need to be able to work all the muscles of the organization at the same time. So you may be focused on one or a few areas, but there are what I call cross-functional capabilities. So I'm trying to grow an organization. Most people would just focus on sales and marketing. That's only part of the equation. I need to be able to growth hack the remaining of the other functions so that they all work together and sustain over time. So in the book, basically, I teach there are 3 phases, which is you start with the growth problem, then you do the growth experiments, and then you do growth extensions. And that's broken down into a roadmap that helps you understand how to do that. And so the very, very starting point is the growth problem itself. It sounds so obvious, but it's probably where a big part of the failure happens because most organizations can't define what the growth problem is very effectively. And so I use a diagnostic tool with 320 points. When I walk into an organization, we kind of figure that out and we come back, we look at it and like, holy cow, okay, that's pretty pinpointed to what the problem is. Because at the end, if we're solving the wrong problem, we're kind of wasting, we're wasting time and effort, right? So, and it sometimes it takes a little bit of hit and miss until we get it right. But once we've got it, we're able to focus on the right area and where to grow. And then we focus into the experimentation part. The experimentation part is where we systematically work as fast as and simple and as cheap as possible to identify where to actually aim. And so this was something that I learned very long time ago, and I call it boardroom ego. And boardroom ego is I get hired by companies come and solve the growth problem. I come to present first day at the board, and everybody seems to have the answer, but yet they have a problem. So imagine there's a problem, but everyone has the answer. And you're kind of sitting there like, okay, this doesn't really make sense. Why would you hire me? Why do you need my help? So what happened was I discovered that there's a barrier that needs to be broken there in this. And in order to grow, what I would do is, you got all these very smart, powerful people sitting at a table. I tell them like, guys, okay, we need to agree to one simple statement to move forward because it plays a really important role in shaping our mindset to heading towards growth. And once you kind of get everybody to that level, and the statement is like, we all agree to, I don't know. And once everybody agrees to that statement, the only thing really left is actually experimentation. Because if you and I don't really know, and we agree to the idea that we don't really know, we have to discover the way forward. And that creates a whole different mindset. It sounds really simple, but in larger organizations, it plays a really vital role in being able to navigate problems, especially at a strategic level, in a very different way. 90+% of the growth hacks that we've developed through this science, I would say come from the unknown. And that's the reason behind it. So if I was doing the same things in the same way, just better, cheaper, or faster than you, then I'm not really actually gaining exponential growth. I'm just growing incrementally. And you can do that. That could be part of your strategy, but that has a limitation in the sense of not just growth, but in the sense of how long it would last. When it comes to exponential growth, when we find areas where we can do things where nobody else has done those kind of things, we have like tons of very like simplistic examples. So part of my second book, which is called Growth Thinking, it's a methodology. It's actually used in some of the large business schools like Harvard. So I've done some articles there with the Harvard Business Review and some of the other major it's all over the place. It's because it's a tool that helps take in a visual way how to take the growth sciences and then convert it into a way that we actually develop a growth strategy and then action it. So I challenged myself in developing this methodology, and I developed something called the 10-day growth hacking challenge. And it's $1 million challenge broken down into $10,000 challenges. And you can watch it on my YouTube channel. So if you go there, there's a ton of very valuable free education. To a point, I guarantee you, by you reach your third video, you're kind of like, where's the trick? When am I going to get charged for this? And I get that all the time, because what happens is when you watch these, you start to see, and we did this intentionally, we look for organizations or small businesses especially that are from all walks of life, different complete demographic, completely different locations around the world, different stages in the business cycle, people in all kinds of different industries, everything from bikinis all the way to ice therapy, to fintech companies, to healthcare. And we have just a wide variety. And the way that you learn from this is not saying, oh, I'm in the healthcare industry, I just want to watch the guys in healthcare. It doesn't work like that. The way it works is you want to see how the mechanics of how we actually implement this. And there's a consistent way. Each contender has 5 videos per season, and you can actually watch the progression, how we go through this. And so you see like really simple ways of how we look at this, but you'll see the whole science behind it. So it looks very simple up front, but when you see the background to know how we actually got to that conclusion and how we actually experiment and how we deal with failure, quickly as possible, then you would be able to take some of those things and be able to implement it the way that into your own type of business. So
I'd love for you to talk about what you've seen or what you've found with the differences between organizations and companies that are implementing some of these things that you're teaching and talking about and helping them learn how to implement versus those that are not.
The biggest takeaway for me has been one element of mindset that is the difference in how people develop when they work with me versus those who don't. And that's the distance between an idea and action. And it sounds really simple. Like I'm telling you, it sounds really simple, but it's highly complex. So when I work with the founder or the principal owner or the CEO of an organization, the faster that he or she and can get their team around this idea of action and idea and the distance coming much closer together, the success rate goes through the roof. And that's purely because there's a whole bunch of elements to this. So when we go through things and we think, oh, okay, if I pursue this, has got to be the best way to do things. And once you get rid of that and you remove the emotion from that, your mindset completely changes. And you're able to pursue some of these things at like a completely different level. So there are, of course, many more things to this, but I would say that's like the number one thing that I see working with different founders and CEOs of organizations. I can see the leap, the personal leap that they have once they jump through that mindset. Like they're just on top of that. The way that they take risk changes, the way that they navigate dealing with failure, the way that they're able to identify opportunities. And I can tell you the conversations, by the time we crack that point, that distance comes much closer. The ability to see opportunity in ways that they've never seen it before completely transforms. Completely transforms.
You mentioned working with small businesses. Most of our clients are what I refer to as oftentimes a high growth small business that's really growing quickly. We help companies franchise their business at my company. And so we're oftentimes dealing with franchisors that are in this emerging franchise group where they're selling their first 10, their first 30, 40, 50 franchises in that section. And so what I'm wondering is how you've seen this implemented, maybe a first step or two that someone say, well, I love your ideas. This is interesting, but what's a first step to kind of get going down this process? How do they do that?
Sure. So one of the barriers to crossover, especially when it comes to franchising. So let me bring it down into that area. So there's a concept that it's called growth on cocaine. I've got 2 videos on it. It's very popular. Okay. It's a brain chemistry issue. So, and it's a bit controversial as a terminology. So don't worry, I'm not promoting anything that shouldn't be promoted by saying this. But what happens is it's equivalent to experience something for the first time, and then you pursue that same experience with the same amount of energy the first time you'd experienced it. But the second time you go for it, you need to put in more energy and effort for a marginally better experience than what you had the first time. And so you continuously do that. And that's the same thing with growth. It's actually the same exact brain chemistry. So you get this first hit, you get this growth, right? You're just nailing it. And then you're like, yes, I've got it. We're growing. And then it's actually one of the most dangerous things that can ever happen to your business. And when I work with teams and, someone from sales or marketing comes in and says, man, we just, we see this huge thing. And I look at them and I said, oh boy, I want to celebrate, but we got a much bigger strategic problem here. And they're like, what's that? And I say, well, what you're looking for is a rising horizon. And a rising horizon is where your ability to grow over a period of time sustainably, where you're perpetuating the growth, where you're putting in less effort and more growth is coming out of it. It'll never happen like a spike. And it feels like it. And especially companies that are funded by very aggressive venture capitalists, you are most likely to fall into this kind of trap because they're looking for that hockey stick, and that again is the same brain chemistry, and that is very dangerous. It can be very detrimental to your business. I've been in this scenario so many times. It feels intoxicating, which is exactly what it is, and you want to keep hitting it, and you eventually will not be able to sustain it. So you need to look at it in different ways. So that's what growth sciences will help you do, is understand how to compound those experiments once you enter to expanding them and scaling them. how do you compound them so that they're consistently working harder than you are and then sustaining over a long period of time? So in franchising, that's very, very crucial. We've worked with a few franchises in the past, and we've seen this multiplier effect. And at the center of franchise is scalability by nature. One of the problems with franchises, though, so there's a difference between a scalable business and let me kind of go back. So the nature of some businesses are not scalable. So if I'm a lawyer, or more labor or craftsmanship is involved in what I do. So I'm a lawyer, I'm an accountant, a consultant, PR guy, whatever it might be. The lowest common denominator is actually my skill. And so what I need to scale is the skill. So I can become not a scalable business, but a sizable business. So I can still become $1 billion business, but it wouldn't be because I'm scalable, it's because I'm sizable. It's two different things. And a lot of companies have a lot of problems with that. So if you're franchising, there's like a labor-intensive part of it, and there's a unique skill that's required. You have to look at it from a sizable rather than a scalable business. It doesn't mean you wouldn't use tools and methods to scale. You'd just be dealing with it a lot differently, because you would have to be able to deal with the sizability part, which is your craftsmanship and your know-how as an individual, or individuals even. Yes.
I'd love for you to talk about why you think growth hacking will be the number one super skill to have in the future.
Well, this is a very interesting story. So I kind of learned this by accident. So there was a growth hacker in the UK contacted me roughly, I think, 2021. And I do several different industry reports. And one of them was an estimate of how many growth hackers actually existed. And so at that period was about 5,000 growth hackers. There's not very many. And there's a very specific reason. There's a 16-point criteria that we use. So it's kind of like, someone says, I'm a lawyer, but they're not really a lawyer, or whatever profession is, and someone can just claim it, because there isn't really a certification body that can do it, because you can't really go to Harvard and say, I'm going to become a growth hacker. Not yet. We may be there soon, but it's not quite there yet. Nonetheless, so his client is one of the world's largest recruitment firms. They were looking a bit deeper into the skill set. And so they wanted to have a consultation with me. So they asked me how this estimate worked, and then what would it look like a year and a half later, which is the time we had the conversation. I said, it would be around double, but it's still not very many, because we're still talking about 9 to 11, 12,000 people. It's not a lot of people. And so they turned around and they said, okay, we want to show you something. We want to pick your brain on something. And so they've got this massive algorithm where they have a model, and they scale out all the skills and required for certain emerging industries against the different talent that's available. And so they had determined that by 2030, 1 million growth hackers would be needed and become the number one super skill of the future. And the reason behind that was, and that's what I saw in my own practice as well, was that let's say you got strategy, technology, and innovation. These are all important components, but at the end, if they don't grow your organization, the technology, innovation, and strategy is useless. So it all has to lead to growth. If it doesn't lead to growth, then it's a pointless exercise. It's pointless to spend even time and money on it. So unless it leads to growth, it won't really add up. And so that's why it's become the super skill of the future, because it's a science and the demand on it is very high. So roughly, at least a year ago when we did this assessment, there's roughly 120% premium paid for these type of skill sets in the marketplace. And the demand continues to outpace the supply, and it's going to look like that for at least the next decade. So it's a field that I would highly recommend if people are very keen and interested to learn and be in. You'd be in a very interesting space. I'll put it like that.
For someone who's tuning in, maybe they're interested in becoming a growth hacker, but the more likely scenario is that someone's saying, well, this sounds great. How do I find someone to add to my team? Are there some recruiting strategies or techniques to help identify someone who actually is what they claim to be?
So I wrote a whole book about that, which is Hire Me If You Can. And because I face the exact same problems. I would work with a client, and by the time I'm done, they're like, okay, we need another you. We need like a copy of you, or a way to continue. And of course, I help them build the systems and the strategy to do that. But the problem is you still need somebody there. And I tell them, like, even us inside the industry, we have trouble hiring those kinds of people. So when we have trouble hiring those kinds of people, we kind of step back and we tell them, like, listen, we'll use our network. And as I use my network, because I've got the Growth Ninja School and all that, I found myself being a recruiter, but a highly paid recruiter, by the way. That's like they pay me fees for something else, but I'd be recruiting for them. And so what happened was that it's just like, it's not that easy to do, but it's not impossible. So in Hire Me If You Can, I actually literally outlined 600 plus ways that we've used for us and our clients, how to identify growth hackers, where to find them, how to attract them. When you're competing against organizations that have like top-notch growth hackers, how do you How do you hire other growth hackers to compete with them? Because you're going to need equal or not equal, even better growth hackers than what they have. There's some pretty spicy strategies in there. Let me put it like that. How we've done it and how we've helped clients to do it. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, Nader, this is a great time in the show where we make a transition and we ask every guest the same 4 questions before they go. And the first question we ask is, have you had a miss or two on your journey and something you learned from it?
Had a lot of misses. In fact, I've had more misses than anything else. They're probably the number one contributor to me moving forward in anything. So my attitude towards it has been, I look forward to failure, let it happen, because if I stumble 3-4 times, on the 5th time, I'm more likely to hit something that's way more successful than if I got the first time. And early in my career, I was actually very lucky. I was actually able to take the second company I ever built public, which was one of the world's first internet service providers, Canada Online. We'd done so well going to IPO and we got bought out during that time. And that can be a very intoxicating experience, because when you have an early success like that, your mind completely, oh man, I can run the world here. The universe is kind of wrapped around my finger. It is human nature. I'm telling you, that can be like the worst thing that can happen to you. And you only realize that with time.
Any other makes or wins or highlights that you'd like to share?
Highlights. Oh, wow. I have so many, but I would say the most exciting highlight in my career has been working with NASA, an organization I would have never dreamed in a million years would ever show an interest in anything that I do. And that was a mind bender opening to me, working with a group of people who I found a new home with, because it was a mindset that is very difficult to find. And that is essentially when you're breaking the boundaries of innovation and there's literally nothing in front of you except you believing in an idea or believing that it's possible. Being in an environment like that and working with people who believe in that and work with you to do things like that is an incredible experience. Probably the most enriching experience I've had until now. And I hope there are many other better ones to come. It's a difficult one to top off. I'll tell you that. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about a multiplier you've used to grow yourself, your business, personally, professionally.
I'll give you a story very early on. So very, very early on when I learned about how to scale and multiply, and I was stumbling on it rather than it was actually into a science that I was able to demonstrate in a book. When we were growing our internet service provider in the early days in the 90s, and we were going public, we were going to go across the country. And so we had to build POPs, a point of presence across the country. And these points of presence at that time were very expensive. I remember they were around, the starting point was about $350,000, which in retrospective, it doesn't sound like a lot of money. But when you got to multiply that across 20 cities, and then you got to run them, and then it gets very hefty, and hence why we were raising money. And then all of a sudden, I had met somebody, and this is where you remember I was talking about the distance between idea and execution comes into play, and how you see opportunities. So at that time, there was an individual I met. He was an engineer who founded a company that deals with what's a VOP, a virtual point of presence. And this is in the very early stage. So he had developed an algorithm, which is essentially the switchboard for the internet in many ways. It has the ability to speed up internet access and how to manage data in a data center. And this is like just in the really early days. And so he already had a presence in all these data centers in places I needed to be. And there was just a bit of infrastructure needed. So rather than spending $350,000, I was able to actually gain a presence for about $1,200 per city. And it's probably one of the biggest multipliers of the growth hack I've ever done, because when I took that to my board while going public, and I was like, well, for the same amount of money, we can still do the same thing, but we can have way more money to do way other things, like penetrating markets where we can get more customers rather than it being stuck in infrastructure, and work like that.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And well, the final question we ask every guest is, what does success mean to you?
For me, it's helping other people realize their potential. I have a super skill where I'm able to identify the talent in somebody before they can see it themselves and help them extract it from them. And I love doing that when I'm able to work with someone to crack that barrier. And once I'm able to do that, I think that's a huge success for me, because my success comes through the success of my clients and the things I do for others, actually not necessarily for me, which is cool in one way, but kind of sucks as well sometimes, because you're so invested in your clients. Kind of wonder, well, what am I doing for myself, other than obviously getting paid well for it? Which, that's just how it is, right?
And before we go here, is there anything you were hoping to share or get across that you haven't had a chance to yet?
what I mentioned earlier about the 10-day growth hacking challenge, I think it's an amazing tool on my YouTube channel. So you go to YouTube and just type in my full name, Nader Sabri, and the Sabri with a Y at the end. And you'll get like a ton of information on my channel. So there's 10-day growth hacking challenge, the tutorials across the board about what is growth hacking, how does growth hacking work, where do you find a growth hacker, what top tools, one of the top questions, like what are the tools, right? And so we got something called the 20-minute tool test. And I teach people how to do the 20-minute tool test, so how you can figure out what is actually the right tool, because it isn't necessarily what people tell you it is, it's what works for you and how do you figure that out. So there's a lot of rich content in there that's free. I always just tell people like, it's there, use it, tap into it. You can write to me by reaching out to my website. Again, just my full name, nadersabri.com. Catch me on LinkedIn. Again, just type in my full name, you'll find me. And if you have a question, you can just drop me a message, a DM, and we can go from there.
Nader, thank you so much for a fantastic interview. And let's go ahead and jump into today's 3 key takeaways. So takeaway number 1 is when he was describing growth hacks and these systems and processes that people will use. What he described is when people are trying to figure out a system to use, it's about figuring out and finding the one that works for you. Very often, as he describes, that the person who's teaching you this growth hack or formula, it's a system they figured out to work for themselves, and now they're sharing it with others. So I thought that was a great takeaway. And his book that he mentioned helps you find the formula that works for you. Takeaway number 2 is growth science equals disproportionate results. And I thought that was interesting. So growth science brings together cross-functional areas, and you start with the growth problem, then growth experiments, and then growth extensions. So growth problem, growth experiments, and growth extensions. Takeaway number 3 is when he described the difference between a scalable business versus a sizable business. And he said, if your business requires a lot of specialized skills or education, well, it may not be scalable, but it is sizable. And I find that to be very interesting because that's part of the reason why we help companies franchise their business. In many cases, it may not be scalable without franchising. Franchising actually allows you to create a scalable business and a sizable business. And now it's time for today's win-win. So today's win-win is when he talked about the differences between what growth science is and is not. And he said growth science helps you achieve or condense that distance between an idea and action. And so it's the idea that the faster that someone can move between an idea to action is critical. So growth science helps you remove the emotion from the decision, make the mindset jump, and then the ability to see it or to go after it. So I thought that was a great win-win. Oftentimes, we're looking at this, and as leaders of our organization, sometimes we're getting in our own way. I think that's just so true in many instances. And so that's the episode today, folks. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast and give us a review. And remember, if you or anyone you know might be ready to franchise their business or take their franchise company to the next level, please connect with us at BigSkyFranchiseTeam.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to having you back next week.